Hello and welcome to Mech Warriors. My name is Brian Block. I'm a sound designer for games, and today I'm going to show you how to rig your character for audio using animation events and MecAnim in Unity3D. Now, I use the term rigging when talking about sound because I'm making an analogy to animation. In 3D animation, characters are rigged to be animated by creating a skeleton, joints, and other components necessary to make the character's body move. In Unity, we can piggyback on the animation system to set our characters up to make sounds when they move, like footsteps and rustling of clothing, jingling of different pieces of gear, stuff like that. In this video, I'll show you how to get the right sounds in the right places and set your character up with the necessary components to make them look and sound like they're moving around in your game world. Here's what you'll need before you get started. The exercise files downloaded from the MechWarrior site. Here you'll have the Unity project with all the animations and all the sound effects that you need to do this tutorial. I also expect that you have a proficiency with the Unity3D interface. I'm going to be moving windows around and referring to different places inside the editor, so I expect that you know what I'm talking about. I also expect that you have a working knowledge of the C# programming language. I'll be moving pretty quickly through the scripting portion of this tutorial, so I won't be lingering on things like the basics of programming. If you're all set, then let's get started. And before we get started, you're going to have the exercise files downloaded from the MechWarriors website. Once you do and have them extracted, I've got mine here on the desktop, go ahead and open it up and take a look what's inside. Here we have the audio files that you'll need for this tutorial, and also the Unity project that has all the animations and stuff that we'll need to work in Unity. The audio files folder has the original long-form recording of footsteps. If you want to practice cutting up footsteps, I put that in there for you. But the audio edited folder is where we have our single footsteps. I included 6 of them. Those are what we're going to be using today with our animation events. Go ahead and go back out to the Unity project and open up the assets folder. Here you should see an audio events scene. Double click on that and that will open up Unity for us. Okay, now that we've got Unity open, we can see we've got a scene here and a couple of different objects in our hierarchy, including the player prefab. If you press play, you can see what this does. Using the W, A, S, and D keys, you can walk around the environment and use the mouse to move the camera. And if you hold shift, you'll be able to run. So these are the 2 animations we're going to be working with today, walking and running. And the sound effects we're going to add to these animations are footsteps, of course. Now before we do anything, we're going to have to get our audio into the project. So down in the project hierarchy, I'm going to right click on the assets folder and I'm going to create a new folder. And I'm going to call it audio. This is where I'll keep all the audio assets for this game. Now I'm going to make my window a little bit smaller and go back into my exercise folder and find the audio that we need. So inside audio files, audio edited, should be a folder called footsteps. Go ahead and drag that folder into the audio folder you just created. Once that's done, you can go ahead and close the window. I'm going to make my project a little bigger and then drill down into my audio folder. Now inside the footsteps folder you'll have 6 different audio files, and these are all individual footsteps that I've named with naming conventions that make sense to me. So going from more general to more specific, footsteps on concrete, and if I click on that you can see it's called footsteps concrete sneaker 1. When you have one of those audio files selected, look over in the inspector and you'll see the import settings for it. I'm going to leave 3D sound checked. I want this to be a 3D sound. I want it to be affected by the distance properties of the game. You can also preview the file down below and check it out. And now that we've got all of our audio files into the project, we're ready to start setting up our character to make these sounds. Okay, so with our audio now in the project, let's take a look at how the animation is actually set up. If you look in your scene hierarchy, click on the player prefab. That should select it. Over on the right in the inspector, you'll notice that this player character has an animator or animation controller attached to it. This animator here. Now we need to find the controller for this animation, and we can do that very simply by clicking on Final Movement Controller here. And that'll navigate us to where this controller lives in our project down on the bottom. And if you double click on Final Movement Controller here, it'll open up our MecAnim animation tree. And this shows how the player can cycle between 3 different animations: idle, walking, and running. And what we need to do is edit these animations so we can insert events at certain points that will fire off our footstep animations when the character is walking or running. To do that, I need to open up my animation window and look at the timeline. Go up to Window and select Animation. Now, this will open up the animation window somewhere in the editor. I'm actually going to drag my tab down to the bottom here so it's easier to see the whole timeline. And I'm also going to click on my Scene tab so I can see my character. Now I don't see anything in this animation window yet, but if I select my player prefab, now I can see in the animation window all of the character's different body parts and all of the keyframes associated with the animation. Now, you don't need to worry about all those keyframes. We're not going to touch those. This animation has been imported from some 3D animation software, and it's already finished. What we're going to do is scrub through the walk and run animations and drop in events when we see a footfall for our footstep sounds. So go down here to the animation window and use this drop down menu here to select the walk forward animation. Now if you hit record, you can actually use the marker here to scrub through the animation. And if you kind of position your camera here in the scene view, you can see the whole body there and determine where the footfalls are and where you want the footstep sounds to play. Now here's where we run into a problem. If you look at this drop-down selector that we use to pick the walk animation, you'll notice that this animation file is read-only. That means that we cannot edit it, but there is a way around it. So we've run into a problem with our animation files being read-only. Now this is very common. This will happen when a character is imported from another piece of software and his animations were created somewhere else. More often than not, complex animations are not going to be created in Unity. And we can get around this by duplicating the animations and then hooking them back up using the animator. Let's get started. I'm going to go into my Project tab and then drill down into my Animation Assets folder until I see a character. And here's our character that was imported. And if you click on the little arrow next to him, it'll open up the hierarchy of components for this character. It has different body parts, eyes and teeth and stuff like that. And these 5 animations here are the animations that came with it. It has walk forward, backwards, run forward and backwards, and idle. We're only going to be concerned with run and walk forwards in this tutorial. So what I need to do is select walk forwards, and then I'm going to hit Command D or Control D on a PC to duplicate. And now we've got a new one here outside of the character hierarchy. I'm going to do the same thing for run forward. Command D or Control D on a PC, and now I've got both those animations and they're duplicated outside of the character. I'm going to rename them so that I know which ones they are. So for run forward, I'm going to rename it run forward underscore audio. So I know this is the animation that has the audio events attached to it. I'm going to do the same thing for walk forward. Now that we've got that set up, we need to go into the animator and reattach the animations. So up at the top here, I've got my animator tab. I'm going to select the walking node. And notice that here in the inspector, under motion, you'll see walk forward. Now this is the original animation. Now if we select the little dot here next to the animation, we can actually select a new animation to be associated in this node. And I'm going to select walk forward audio and then close. Now I'll do the same thing for running. So I'll click the running node, click my options here for the animation, and click run forward audio and close. Now we're all hooked up, so our running and walking states will now use the run forward and walk forward audio animations that we created. We are all set to start creating events for our animations. So we've got our editable animations hooked up, but there are a few things that we need to do before we start creating and dropping in those events in the animation window. The first thing we need to do is set up the player so that he's an audio source. So I'm going to select my scene view and then select my player prefab in the scene hierarchy. And then I'm going to add a component. So in the inspector, click add component, click audio, and then audio source. Now the only thing we have to worry about is this play on awake thing. You want to uncheck that, because what that'll do is it'll play an audio clip when the scene is alive, and we don't want that. We just want to be able to control when these sounds play. So if you click that, we are all set to start scripting. When you create an animation event in the animation timeline, what you're actually doing is setting up a trigger to fire off a function from a script. We're going to create that right now. So we need to create a new script for our character. So what I'm going to do is go down into my project hierarchy and click on the scripts folder. You should see two scripts in there. One is for player movement and one is for the camera. We're going to create a new one. So right click, select create, and then new C# script. And it's going to prompt you to name it. So I'm going to name it something like audio footsteps. And then hit enter. And now to edit that script, I'm just going to double click. And that'll open up our script in MonoDevelop. Now I've got the update and start functions here. I don't need the update function, so I'm going to delete it. I will leave the start, because we'll need that later. The first thing I'm going to do is declare a variable. I'm going to declare a public array for our audio clips. And this is going to be important because we've got 6 footstep sounds that we need to play, and I want them to play at random, so we don't have a lot of repetition in our footsteps when our character runs around. So I'm going to say public audio clip, open and close square brackets to indicate that it is an array, and I'm going to call it footsteps. And now underneath start, I'm going to create our custom function. So let's go void, and let's call our function play footsteps. And open and close the brackets. Now I'm going to keep this function very simple for now, and then we'll go back in and we'll customize it. But for right now, all we need it to do is select a clip at random to play, and then just to play it. So I'm going to go audio.clip equals footsteps, our array. And our value for the array is going to be a random range between 0 and the length of the array, in case we want to add more footstep sounds later on. So random.range between 0 and the length of the array. So that is going to select a random footstep sound. Now we just need to tell it to play. So audio.play. And that's it. Now we're ready to hook this thing up and get the events working in our animation timeline. So now back in the editor, what we need to do is hook the script up to our player prefab and then associate all of the audio files that we brought in with the array that we just created. So I'll click on our player prefab, and I'm going to go over to the right in the inspector and go to Add Component. Select Scripts, and then find the script that we just created, Audio Footsteps. Now you'll see we have this footsteps variable. This is our array, and the size is 0. I'm going to go ahead and click that, and I know that the size of our array is going to be 6 because we have 6 audio files right now. Now we can always change that because it's a public variable and it's now in the inspector. So I'm just going to put in 6 and hit enter. And now I've got 6 slots here for audio clips. So I can do this a couple different ways. I can go into our audio folder, into footsteps, and individually drag these in, or I can just hit the little dot here and select our footsteps. So I'll just double click on that. So I've got footsteps concrete sneaker number 1 in the first slot, and I'll just keep doing that all the way down. There we go. So now our array has all 6 of our audio files in it. Alright, so now let's set up the events that are going to fire off these audio files. So let's make sure our player is still selected, and then head down into the animation window. And I'm going to make sure that walk forward is selected, and then hit record. Now, like we did before, we can scrub through this animation and find where his foot hits the ground, and that's where we want that footstep to play. So I'm going to kind of find where his foot comes in contact with the ground, so right about there. And then to insert an event, I'm going to go to this icon right here. If you hover over it, it says Add Event, and just click that. Now Unity is going to prompt me to associate this event with a function. So if I go up here, I can see here's our custom function that we created, play footsteps. And I select that, and that one's ready to go. Now I'm going to just keep scrubbing through and find the second footfall, which is right there. And insert another event. And then the event window, I'll select again, play footsteps. And we can test that out. So I'll close that, stop the record, and then I'll press play and walk around a little bit. It looks like that's working. Good. So I'm going to hit stop. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the run animation. So go back down to my animation window and select run forward audio, and then hit record. And your player might jump around in the scene a little bit, so I'm just going to position myself so I've got a little room to see him. That looks good. And then I'm going to scrub through the animation and find where his foot hits the ground. Looks like it happens right away at the beginning. So I'll click Add an Event, and then choose Play Footsteps. I'll do the same thing for the second one. Looks like it's right there. Add an event, play footsteps. And now we can test this one. So I'll close this window, stop the record, press play, and run around. So walking is working, and so is running. Now keep in mind, you can always adjust these events. So if you test it out and it doesn't quite sound right, you can go back down into the animation window and move the events around and kind of adjust them. You can even get as granular as selecting individual body parts and then looking at the curves. So down here next to dope sheet is curves. So you can find an animation here, and it's got this curve, so I could, scrub through and find a very particular spot to insert an event. Stuff like clothing foley, gear, stuff like that, that would be really good to look at the curves for that. Now that we've got our sound effects firing off at the appropriate time during the animations, let's talk a little bit about how we can customize the sound using exposed parameters in the animator. Now you may have noticed that when we were playing around with our character, that the walking sounds and the running sounds are exactly the same. That's because they're both pulling from the same pool of the same audio files. Now to cut down on the amount of audio files we have to add to our Unity project, we can actually alter the properties of the audio that's being played using some parameters in the animator. You might expect our walking sound effects to be a little bit quieter, and our running footsteps to be a little bit louder and also higher in pitch. Those are some of the things that we can change using some of the parameters in the animator. So let's try that. I'm going to press stop, and then I'm going to go up to my animator window. Now down below in the corner, you can see parameters. And now there's been a movement state created for this particular animation to govern when the player is going to be running or walking. And we can see that movement state is an integer value. To see those values, we can look at the transitions between idle and running, or idle and walking, or the other way around. To see the transitions, I'm going to click on our transition arrow from idle to running. And it looks like the running animation is going to play when the movement state value is 2. And I can click on any transition to walking and see that the walking animation will play when the movement state is equal to 1. And this is all the information I need in order to start scripting some customization for our sounds. So I'll go back into my project hierarchy and open up my audio footsteps script. Okay, now that we're in our script, I want to do two things. First, I'm going to declare the animator as a variable so that I can easily access the information that I need in the script. Secondly, I'm going to tell the audio source to pitch up when we're running, and then I'm going to tell it to turn the volume down when we're walking. So let's start. First thing, let's add the variable. So underneath my public audio clip, I'm going to type animator, and I'm going to call it anim, just for short. And then in my start function, I need to actually get the animator component. So I'm going to give myself a little room, and then anim equals get component animator, and open and close your parentheses and close it. And now in my custom function play footsteps, I'm going to create a conditional statement. If anim.get integer, and if you remember, the movement state parameter is an integer, and in the parentheses I'm going to put the name of the parameter, which is movement state. And I'll say if it's equal to 2. If you remember, 2 was running. So basically I'm saying if we're running, audio.pitch is equal to 1.2f. Now this is a value that I've tested out myself. You can feel free to test out your own value for pitch, or you can assign it to a public variable so you can adjust it in the inspector. I'm going to stick with 1.2f for now. I'm also going to say audio.volume equals 1. Now 1 is the default value, so I want the running sound to be as loud as possible, and then we'll turn the volume down on the walking in an else statement. So else audio.pitch is equal to 1, and audio.volume is equal to 0.5. So basically I'm saying if we're running, pitch it up and keep it as loud as possible, and if we're walking, keep it at the default pitch value, and then turn the volume down about halfway. Let's get back into the editor and test it out. Okay, so back in the editor, let's hit play. And our walking sounds are a bit quieter. And we turn the volume up a little bit when we run, and the pitch goes up too. So while our first instinct may have been to supply two completely different sets of audio files for walking and running, we've been able to customize them enough to make them distinct. And that saves us a bit of bandwidth and a bit of space in our game project. Now our character is all rigged up for footstep audio. The events that we created are linked permanently to the animations, so other characters that use the same movements will have footstep sounds as well. You don't have to do anything more. In the future, you may want to create a variety of footsteps on different materials to accommodate varying textures and surfaces in the game, or you may need to be able to swap out different shoe types or character foley, but this initial audio rigging process will always fire off the appropriate footstep events, even if you need to change the audio files. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial on creating audio events with Unity's MecAnim. I'm Brian Block. Thanks for tuning into Mech Warriors, and I hope to see you again for some more fun with audio and animation.